Imagine you are standing in a dimly lit, incredibly noisy arcade nestled right in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon.
Right, the year is 1981.
Exactly, 1981. And the atmosphere, is completely overwhelming to the senses.
Absolutely overwhelming.
We are surrounded by the familiar, comforting electronic beeps, the heavy clatter of quarters dropping into coin slots, and the synthesized melodies of iconic machines.
The classic.
Yeah, you see the bright yellow maze of Pac-Man, the scrolling stars of Defender, and the stark white vectors of Asteroids.
And the air inside this space is thick.
It really is. It smells of warm electronic components, ozone from the cathode ray tube monitors, and heavily trafficked carpet.
Just that quintessential 1980s arcade smell.
Right. But amidst these brightly colored, highly recognizable cabinets, featuring their vivid marquee artwork and side panels, there sits something, well, entirely different.
Something that doesn't fit in at all.
It is a mysterious, plain black cabinet.
Completely devoid of the usual flashy artwork.
Yeah, no instructions, no branding. And yet, it is drawing massive, unprecedented crowds of mesmerized kids.
They are not just standing around it either.
No, they are lining up shoulder to shoulder, literally, desperately, and aggressively fighting each other for their turn to play.
Which is such a striking visual.
It is. So today, our audio exploration is an exhaustive, chronological biography of an urban legend. We are tracing the origins, the evolution, and the massive cultural impact of the most dangerous video game to never exist, tracking its entire history right up to the present day in 2026.
Setting the scene in that specific sensory way is exactly what we need to understand the environment where this story takes root.
I agree completely.
We have been provided with a massive stack of notes from an encyclopedic entry on urban legends, and our mission is to dissect this incredibly persistent myth with absolute precision.
We really need to get into the details.
You're going to trace the life cycle of this legend from its supposed physical origins in those 1981 Portland arcades through its digital footprint in the late 1990s, all the way to its massive pop culture legacy.
It covers so much ground.
What we will be doing is dissecting the real-world anxieties, the historical events, and the cultural panic of the early digital age that fueled this story and allowed it to survive and mutate for decades.
Okay, let's unpack this right from the beginning by looking at the specific anatomy of the myth itself.
Let's do it.
The claims of the legend are genuinely unsettling because they deviate so sharply from what a video game was understood to be in 1981.
They really do.
According to the documents provided, this game, which was called Polybius, suddenly appeared in these suburban Portland arcades out of nowhere.
Just materialized.
As I mentioned, it was housed in a completely featureless black cabinet. But it is the description of the gameplay that really captures the imagination and sets the foundation for the horror.
The gameplay is where it gets truly strange.
The legend describes the game as being abstract, geometric, psychoactive, and intensely addictive.
Right.
It was not a standard space shooter where you defend a ship, and it was not a maze game where you collect points.
No, not at all.
It was something that supposedly interacted directly with the player's mind, utilizing pulsing lights and subliminal geometry to create a trance-like state.
And the purported effects of this intense psychoactive interaction were nothing short of horrifying.
Really horrifying.
The information details that children who played this arcade game were said to suffer from an array of severe neurological and psychological symptoms.
We are talking about profound amnesia.
Yes, amnesia, crippling insomnia that lasted for days, intense epileptic seizures right there on the arcade floor, night terrors, and incredibly vivid waking hallucinations.
It's a cascade of medical nightmares.
Exactly. And the narrative emphasizes a dark and compelling paradox here.
Which is what makes it so sinister.
Despite these severe, terrifying, adverse physical and mental effects, the cabinet was described as being so fundamentally addictive that players simply could not stop.
They just kept playing.
The compulsion to play completely overrode their basic survival instincts. They returned to the machine repeatedly.
Even though it was literally destroying them.
The legend specifically claims that these children formed massive lines, physically fighting and injuring each other for access to the controls, until they ultimately went insane, died, or simply vanished without a trace, never to be seen by their families again.
The physiological toll alone makes it a terrifying concept. But the legend does not stop at biological horror.
No, it introduces a completely different layer.
It introduces a deeply sinister external element to the story. It was not just a malfunctioning machine or a poorly coded game that accidentally caused seizures.
Right, it was intentional.
The story claims that men in black suits frequently visited these specific plain black arcade cabinets.
The classic Men in Black.
Yes, but there were not arcade operators there to empty the coin boxes or fix jammed joysticks.
That is a very specific detail in the notes.
In fact, the legend specifically notes that these men left the quarters entirely behind.
They didn't care about the money at all.
Their sole purpose, allegedly, was to interface with the machine and extract some form of unknown encrypted data that the game had been secretly gathering on the players.
The mechanical details of this operation are equally disturbing.
How so?
It was said that the game could turn itself on autonomously.
Oh, wow.
That adds a layer of supernatural dread or highly advanced technological capability that was far beyond the scope of 1981 computing.
A machine that wakes itself up.
This autonomous behavior feeds directly into the overarching conspiracy theory embedded within the legend.
The idea that it was a test.
Precisely. The suspicion that this was never a commercial entertainment product at all. Instead, it was an incredibly sophisticated psychological experiment designed to test human responses to psychoactive stimuli.
And the documents mention a specific government agency.
Yes, some accounts in our documents specifically connect this operation to the Central Intelligence Agency.
Right.
For context, MKUltra was a highly classified, entirely real program conducted by the CIA beginning in the 1950s, aimed at developing chemical and psychological techniques for mind control.
So people were already aware that this kind of thing had a historical precedent.
Exactly. The legend suggests Polybius was an extension of those exact types of covert programs targeting the youth.
And then what happened to the machines?
According to the myth, after just a few weeks of this localized terror and data collection in Portland, all of the machines vanished without a single trace, wiped from the arcades as quickly as they appeared.
The construction of this narrative is remarkably precise. Why does this specific combination of details endure so effectively?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we can see exactly why the specific set of details is so compelling to the human psyche.
It really is perfectly crafted.
It is a masterclass in modern folklore. It perfectly blends supernatural horror, the idea of an autonomous, maddening machine that controls your thoughts, with very grounded mid-century government conspiracy tropes.
Like the Men in Black.
Yes, the Men in Black and the very real history of programs like MKUltra. It preys on fundamental societal fear.
Which fears specifically?
The fear of the unknown, the fear of rapidly advancing new technology that parents did not understand, and the profound fear of unseen authority figures conducting clandestine experiments on vulnerable children in everyday public spaces.
It turns an arcade into a testing ground.
It turns a place of childhood entertainment into a laboratory of horrors.
That brings us to the crucial pivot of this investigation. We have laid out this terrifying, highly specific narrative set in Portland in 1981.
A very detailed narrative.
But the historical analysis reveals a stark, undeniable reality.
The lack of proof.
There is absolutely zero evidence from the 1980s that this machine ever existed.
None whatsoever.
When we look at the preservation of early video games, there are usually artifacts. But for Polybius, there are no ROM images.
And we should explain what a ROM image is.
Good point. A ROM image, for anyone who might not be familiar with the architecture of early computing, is essentially a digital copy of the game's physical circuit board data.
It is the absolute fundamental DNA of the software.
Preservationists have managed to track down and dump the ROM data for games that had only 1 or 2 physical cabinets ever produced, yet not a single kilobyte of Polybius data exists.
Not one byte.
There are no surviving physical cabinets, not even a fragmented piece of marquee art, a coin door, or a control panel.
No hardware at all.
Crucially, there are 0 contemporary newspaper articles, local news broadcasts, or gaming magazine mentions from the 1980s documenting these supposed mass health incidents or missing children.
Which you would expect if kids were vanishing.
Fact-checking sites, specifically Snopes, equate the entire narrative to modern-day versions of 1980s schoolyard rumors about Men in Black recording high-score initials from arcade machines. The physical trail is a complete ghost.
The absolute lack of physical evidence requires us to shift our focus from the physical arcades to the digital realm.
We have to look elsewhere.
If it did not exist in the 1980s, where did the story actually originate?
That is the big question.
Our documents pinpoint the very first verifiable mention to a specific digital location.
A website.
An article on a website called coinop.org, a database dedicated to cataloging crane-operated amusement machines.
And the dating on that site is really important.
Now, the article on that site detailing the Polybius legend is plainly dated 1998.
1998?
However, web researchers conducting forensic analysis on the site's history found conclusive evidence that the entry was actually uploaded several years after 1998.
Meaning the date was faked.
This indicates that even the upload date itself was fabricated. When researchers look at the digital archives of the entry from February 6, 2000, the 1998 date is entirely missing from the page.
So what did it say instead?
Instead, the text simply reads, "Reason for modification. New edition. Anyone heard of this game?"
Here's where it gets really interesting, because that detail about the fabrication of the upload date is vital to understanding the intent behind the legend.
It changes everything.
It shows a deliberate, calculated attempt to retroactively age the myth. By stamping it with a 1998 date, the creator gave the story a false sense of historical weight and longevity on the early internet.
It made it seem like an older, established rumor.
And the story surrounding that specific coinop.org page gets even more peculiar and theatrical over time.
It turns into a whole production.
The site promised a massive update on May 16, 2009. The administrator claimed that an individual was taking a specialized investigative trip all the way to Kyiv, Ukraine, to uncover more hidden information about the game's origins.
A very elaborate claim.
But the documents highlight a glaring unresolved fact. Spanning all the way up to the present day in 2026, no further information was ever added to that page regarding the Kyiv trip.
It was just left hanging.
It was a fabricated dangling thread, a cliffhanger designed to keep readers returning to the site that was never actually resolved.
The digital footprint is fascinating. But while the myth was germinating and building an audience on niche web forums, it eventually breached the barrier into mainstream print media.
Which is a massive shift.
Which fundamentally changed its trajectory. The earliest known printed mention of the Polybius legend occurred in the September 2003 issue of GamePro magazine.
GamePro was huge back then.
A massive publication with a huge circulation at the time. It was featured in a story appropriately called Secrets and Lies, written by an author named Dan Electro.
But how did he find out about it?
The crucial detail regarding journalistic validation is how Electro found out about it. The information notes that he was tipped off directly by the owner of coinop.org.
So the source was the same person hosting the myth.
The GamePro article ultimately declared the game's existence inconclusive.
Which is interesting. They didn't just say it was fake.
By doing so, instead of debunking it outright, the magazine inherently spread the legend to a massive new audience of readers while maintaining the alluring mystery.
It validates the question.
This legitimizes the rumor, moving it from an obscure forum post to glossy print, giving it an unearned veneer of credibility.
The attempts to validate and escalate the legend did not stop with magazine articles.
The internet always takes it a step further.
The internet thrives on escalation. In 2006, a lengthy post appeared on the coinop.org forums from an individual presenting themselves as a man named Stephen Roach.
This was a major development in the lore.
This person claimed, with intricate but unverifiable detail, to have founded the game's purported publisher.
He essentially stepped forward as the creator.
He offered a massive backstory about the development of the game, claiming it was an innocent project that accidentally caused health issues.
Trying to ground the horror in a mundane mistake.
It was a classic internet hoax escalation, providing just enough adjacent detail to sound plausible to those who wanted to believe.
But the analysis of all this is pretty definitive.
But when we look at the timeline of publications, the fabrication of the dates, and the sequence of these reveals, the gaming magazine Inverse provided a very clear analytical assessment.
What was their conclusion?
They concluded that the legend of Polybius was almost certainly invented entirely to drive web traffic to coinop.org.
A marketing scheme.
The entire mythology was a search engine optimization strategy disguised as a horror story.
What is particularly revealing about the creator of this hoax is how they constructed the lore, specifically the linguistics and the history of the names involved.
They clearly put thought into it.
It was not a lazy fabrication, it was highly educated. Let us examine the purported publisher of the game, a shadowy company allegedly called Sinneslöschen.
That is a very distinct name.
Author Brian Dunning conducted a thorough linguistic analysis of this specific word and pointed out a critical grammatical flaw that betrays its English-speaking origins.
So it wasn't natural German.
He describes it as not quite idiomatic German.
Yeah.
The intended translation, based on the syllables chosen, was supposed to mean sense delete or sensory deprivation, which fits perfectly with the mind control narrative.
It matches the effects of the game.
However, Dunning notes that the proper standard German grammatical construction for that concept would be Sinneslöschen, without the extra E and S in the middle.
So they basically mash the words together incorrectly.
The spelling, Sinneslöschen, is exactly what you would get if an English speaker crudely combined two German words using an early English to German dictionary without understanding the syntax.
The name of the publisher is a fascinating clue, but the name of the game itself is where the intellectual depth of the hoax truly reveals itself.
This is a great detail.
The game shares its name with the classical Greek historian Polybius, who was born in the region of Arcadia.
Arcadia, like arcade.
Exactly. The information points out the profound, undeniable irony of this choice.
What's fascinating here is the methodology of that historical figure.
The historical Polybius was famous for establishing a very specific, rigorous historical methodology. He famously and strictly asserted that historians must never report what they cannot verify through direct face-to-face interviews with eyewitnesses who were present for the events.
The layers of irony here are staggering and clearly intentional.
It has to be on purpose.
You have an urban legend, a story defined entirely by its complete lack of verifiable evidence, its lack of physical artifacts, and its complete absence of credible eyewitnesses named directly after the very Greek historian who pioneered the absolute necessity of verifiable eyewitness testimony in historical record-keeping.
It's brilliant in a dark way.
Furthermore, the historical Polybius was not just a historian. He was known for his work in early cryptography and puzzles.
Cryptography, tying into the encrypted data the men in black were taking.
He is the namesake of the Polybius square.
What exactly is that?
The Polybius square is an ancient method of cryptography, a grid that allows you to translate letters into numbers, effectively creating a simple substitution cipher.
So it's a code tool.
The analysis drawn from the document suggests that the creator of the hoax likely chose these names very deliberately. They were not randomly selected.
They're playing a game with the audience.
The creator was embedding a cryptographic puzzle and a highly sophisticated meta-joke about the nature of verified history and evidence into a completely fabricated digital legend. They were practically daring the reader to verify the unverified.
Okay, let's unpack the real-world ingredients of this legend.
The actual events that inspired it.
Because even though the game Polybius itself, as described in the myth, was a total fabrication, the building blocks of the story were forged from actual, verifiable historical events that really did take place in Portland, Oregon in 1981.
The truth behind the fiction.
The hoaxer did not invent the scenario out of thin air. They exaggerated real news. The documents provide the true stories of two teenagers who actually did fall severely ill at a Portland arcade on the exact same day in 1981.
On the very same day.
This is a matter of public record.
Yes, the factual basis for the arcade health scares is heavily documented and explains the root of the panic.
Who were the teenagers?
A teenage resident named Michael Lopez was playing the newly released arcade game Tempest.
Tempest is a massive part of arcade history.
Tempest is a crucial detail here. It is a game that utilizes extremely bright, fast-moving vector graphics on a stark black background, requiring the player to spin a rotary dial rapidly while staring into a deep geometric tunnel.
Very intense visually.
While playing, Lopez developed a severe blinding migraine headache.
And it got much worse.
The physiological reaction escalated to the point where he stumbled out of the arcade, blacked out completely, and was later found unconscious in a stranger's yard.
That is a terrifying event for a community to witness.
On that exact same day, at that exact same Portland arcade, another teenager suffered a completely different but equally severe medical event.
Another incident at the same location.
He experienced crippling stomach pain. However, this happened after he played the game Asteroids for 28 hours straight, without sleep or proper nutrition, during a locally filmed attempt to break a high-score world record.
So you have a verified, highly localized, and publicized incident of local kids suffering severe physical distress directly linked to their time playing arcade games.
Right, the seeds of the panic are sown.
The local news would have undoubtedly covered this, causing parental anxiety to spike. But how do the government agents, the men in black, factor into the reality of 1981 Portland?
This is where history aligns perfectly with the myth.
The information notes that just 10 days after those two teenagers fell ill, a remarkably tight timeline, the Federal Bureau of Investigation actually did conduct a massive, coordinated raid on several Portland arcades.
The FBI was physically there.
This was not a small local police matter. It was a massive federal operation. They made 52 arrests across Portland in 1981, and they followed up with another 25 arrests at a single arcade a year later.
The crime driving these federal raids was, of course, entirely grounded in financial illegality, not mind control.
It was about money.
Arcade owners and organized crime affiliates were illegally converting standard video game cabinets into unregulated gambling devices, paying out cash for high scores.
But what were the agents doing leading up to the raids?
But the crucial detail, the specific historical reality that fueled the paranoid mythology of Polybius, is the investigative lead-up to those raids.
This surveillance.
FBI agents, dressed in standard government suits, were genuinely monitoring arcade cabinets in the area for weeks beforehand.
Literal men in suits watching machines.
They were looking for evidence of internal hardware tampering, and they were actively standing in arcades, watching kids play, and recording the initials on the high-score screens.
Why record the initials?
Because those high scores represented the people who were winning the illegal payouts. The FBI needed to identify those players to use them as potential witnesses to the illegal gambling conversions.
So what does this all mean when we put the disparate pieces of 1981 Portland together?
The picture becomes very clear.
You have the highly publicized, localized incident of kids experiencing severe medical emergencies at an arcade. Just 10 days later, you have real federal agents in dark suits standing in those exact same arcades, monitoring the machines, writing down data on clipboards, recording high scores, and leaving the quarters behind.
Followed immediately by a massive raid and dozens of arrests.
The analysis makes it crystal clear.
Sick kids plus real federal agents meticulously recording data on arcade machines equals the absolute perfect, entirely factual foundation for a conspiracy myth to be built upon decades later.
They just changed the context.
The hoaxers simply took these real unsettling events and swapped the motive from illegal gambling to government mind control.
This raises an important question about the broader cultural atmosphere of the time.
The climate in the 1980s?
The events in Portland did not happen in a vacuum. They were a localized flare-up of a national anxiety.
The whole country was on edge about this new medium.
The 1980s were defined by a massive, sweeping cultural panic surrounding video games and digital technology. Early video games represented a paradigm shift in entertainment, and they were the subject of intense fears and anxieties among parents and politicians regarding their potential dangers to the youth.
There was a lot of institutional pushback.
The documents highlight a 1980 New York Times article that specifically commented on the potential for severe arcade addiction, framing these machines as a psychological hazard.
Even the New York Times was sounding the alarm.
Furthermore, authoritative bodies like the National Safety Council issued public claims that video games actively promoted violence and aggressive behavior in minors.
The societal narrative was already primed to view these machines as inherently dangerous.
And the health scares were not entirely unfounded, which added legitimate, verifiable fuel to the fire of public panic.
There were actual medical incidents.
Beyond the incidents in Portland, there are 9 medically recorded cases of arcade games triggering actual epileptic seizures in children during the 1980s.
That is a significant number.
The intense strobing lights of early CRT monitors in dark rooms were a genuine trigger for photosensitive epilepsy, a condition that was less understood by the general public at the time.
It must have been terrifying for parents to hear about.
And then there was a profound, highly publicized tragedy in 1982.
A very sad event.
A healthy teenager collapsed and died from heart failure while playing the intense arcade shooter Berserk in Calumet City, Illinois.
Berserk was known for being highly stressful.
Now, while medical professionals determined that the heart failure was caused by a pre-existing condition and not directly triggered by the software itself, the nuance was lost in the panic.
The headline was just that a game killed a kid.
The tragedy immediately sparked widespread rumors across the country of cursed arcade games that could literally kill you.
What is truly remarkable here is how actual documented corporate practices of the era also perfectly mirrored the conspiracy theories described in the Polybius legend.
The corporations were acting secretively too.
The idea of secret agents testing unknown psychoactive games on the unsuspecting public sounds like pure science fiction.
But it was actually happening in a way.
But the documents detail Atari's actual business practices during this period. Atari, arguably the most dominant arcade developer at the time, engaged in highly secretive field testing.
How did they conduct these tests?
They would covertly place a small number of unfinished experimental video games into public arcades.
Without telling anyone.
Exactly. Their employees would quietly swap out the circuit boards inside the cabinets to test new software versions. They would then stand nearby and closely observe the players' reactions, taking notes on their engagement and frustration levels.
Just men standing in the corner with clipboards.
And crucially, to avoid corporate espionage and copycats from rival developers, they never disclosed to the arcade patrons that they were participating in an active field test for an unreleased product.
They were completely unaware.
It was a perfectly real, documented secret agent scenario playing out in suburban arcades, involving anonymous observers and shifting hardware.
To compound the paranoia, we cannot ignore the factual military use of video games, which completely validates the underlying fear of government involvement in consumer entertainment.
The military angle is a huge part of the Polybius myth.
In the early 1980s, the United States military explicitly recognized the training potential of these digital simulations.
They saw the utility immediately.
They officially commissioned Atari to extensively modify the 3D tank combat game Battlezone. They turned it into a highly specialized, classified training simulator for soldiers called the Bradley Trainer.
A literal military training device.
The information notes that the lead programmer of the original game, Ed Rutberg, was actually morally reluctant to participate in this militarization of his work.
And that reluctance was public.
Right. The controversy was covered by newspapers in 1981. This intersection of military training and commercial gaming was not a one-off event. The practice continued and evolved for decades.
It became standard practice.
For example, in the late 1990s, the military officially modified the popular first-person shooter Doom 2 into a virtual combat training program for Marines, appropriately and publicly called Marine Doom.
So the link between the glowing screen and the military-industrial complex was a documented reality.
When we evaluate all of these intersecting historical facts, the landscape of the 1980s becomes incredibly clear.
It is a perfect storm.
You have a society grappling with a brand new, highly engaging, and poorly understood technology. You have mainstream media driving panics about psychological addiction, actual documented health incidents involving seizures and death, massive undercover corporate testing in public spaces, and verified military involvement in the modification of arcade software.
All of these entirely factual elements created a hyper-paranoid cultural environment.
The soil was incredibly fertile for this myth.
It is no wonder that when the Polybius myth finally surfaced on a web forum in 1998, people were immediately primed to believe it. It did not sound like fiction. It felt entirely true to the historical atmosphere and the genuine anxieties of the early 80s.
Here's where it gets really interesting regarding human psychology. Let's unpack the phenomena of false memories and literary parallels.
This is a vital psychological angle.
If the game Polybius absolutely never existed, what exactly do people remember playing when they swear vehemently that they played it in 1981?
People are absolutely convinced they played it.
The documents run through several prime suspects, actual, physically released games from the era that may have warped and mutated in people's memories over time, absorbing the details of the legend.
Human memory is incredibly fallible, highly suggestible, and prone to retroactive editing.
It changes over time based on new information.
One major candidate for these false memories is a game called Cube Quest, released in 1983.
What made Cube Quest so unique?
Cube Quest was technologically ambitious. It used advanced Laserdisc technology. Laserdisc was a massive optical disc format that allowed the game to display real, pre-rendered animated video footage instead of just basic computer graphics.
So it looked completely different from Asteroids or Pac-Man.
Radically different. This was used to create what the documents describe as incredibly surreal, hallucinogenic environments for players to navigate.
There is that word, hallucinogenic.
However, the advanced Laserdisc players housed inside the arcade cabinets were incredibly fragile and prone to overheating.
The tech wasn't quite ready.
The visuals were stunning and unlike anything else, but the machines broke down constantly. This led to arcade operators rapidly and mysteriously removing them from the arcade floors shortly after they arrived.
So they appeared, blew people's minds, and vanished.
That specific pattern, a visually bizarre, hallucinogenic game that appears, dazzles players, and then suddenly disappears without explanation, perfectly matches the core narrative of the Polybius legend.
Another candidate mentioned in the notes is a game called Polyplay.
This is an interesting geopolitical footnote.
It really is, as it was the only arcade video game ever officially developed and released in East Germany.
Behind the Iron Curtain?
It shared a very similar name and a remarkably similar typeface with the mythical game, which could easily cause linguistic confusion for someone trying to recall a machine they saw decades ago.
The names are incredibly close.
But University of Arizona professor Judd Ruggell points to the game Tempest as perhaps the most significant influence on the false memories.
Tempest keeps coming up in this investigation.
As we discussed earlier regarding the Portland health scares, Tempest was the exact game Michael Lopez was playing when he suffered his severe blackout.
Right, the verified medical incident.
It is an abstract, neon-colored geometric game that requires intense, almost hypnotic focus and rapid physical input from the player.
It demands your complete attention.
And fascinatingly, adding to the mystique, the core gameplay loop of Tempest was actually inspired directly by the real-world nightmares of its lead creator.
It was literally born from a dark psychological space.
What is particularly revealing about the mechanics of this hoax is how the documents address the specific claims of early internet discussions.
The claims about Usenet.
When the legend gained traction, some people swore up and down that they remembered discussing Polybius on early Usenet boards in the early 1990s, years before the fabricated 1998 coinop.org post.
Which would predate the hoax if it were true.
For context, Usenet was a precursor to modern web forums, a massive, text-only bulletin board system used heavily by tech enthusiasts.
A very tight-knit digital community.
However, exhaustive research and archiving show that absolutely zero archived Usenet posts from that era contain any mention of the game.
The archives are clean.
Instead, researchers suggest this is a textbook example of a collective false memory. People are highly likely conflating the Polybius legend with something called the Publius Enigma.
The Publius Enigma is a whole other rabbit hole.
The Publius Enigma was an actual, complex, unsolved internet puzzle deeply connected to the marketing of Pink Floyd's 1994 album, The Division Bell.
It was a massive deal online.
It involved cryptic messages from an anonymous user named Publius, and it was widely and obsessively discussed on Usenet at that exact time.
The phonetic similarity between Polybius and Publius is undeniable.
It caused the memories of the two internet mysteries to merge over time.
The pop culture predecessors of the era also laid massive groundwork for these false memories to take root.
The fiction before the hoax.
The hoaxer did not invent the concept of a sinister arcade cabinet. Rumors of arcade machines specifically designed to brainwash, hypnotize, or covertly recruit players were already circulating heavily in the cultural zeitgeist of the late 70s and early 80s.
They were just floating around the culture.
The documents note that these exact pervasive rumors directly influenced the plot of the major 1984 science fiction film The Last Starfighter.
A very famous movie.
In that film, a seemingly standard arcade cabinet placed in a trailer park is actually used by an advanced alien coalition to monitor, test, and recruit a teenage gamer for an interstellar war.
So the idea was already mainstream.
And perhaps the most striking, undeniable literary parallel is Robert Max's 1984 novel, simply titled Arcade.
I am not familiar with that one.
While it was less commercially popular than a blockbuster film like The Last Starfighter, the book featured a fictional narrative that is incredibly, almost suspiciously similar to the Polybius legend we are discussing today.
How similar are we talking?
The entire plot of the novel centered specifically on clandestine government mind control experiments being conducted on teenagers through newly installed video game arcades in a small town.
That is exactly the Polybius script.
The cultural consciousness of the 1980s was absolutely saturated with these specific hyper-targeted anxieties long before the Polybius hoax was formally constructed and published online. The soil was already fertilized for the myth to grow.
So tracing the legacy of this story from a simple, localized internet hoax into an absolute pop culture juggernaut spanning from the 2000s up to the present day in 2026 reveals its incredible staying power.
It has survived a very long time.
The media cameos alone are staggering. It evolved from a niche forum post into a recognized symbol of retro paranoia.
It is a visual shorthand now.
The documents note its appearances in major mainstream television shows, cementing its status as a highly recognizable cultural touchstone. It appeared in the background of an arcade in a 2006 broadcast of The Simpsons, and later was featured as a plot point in the 1980 sitcom The Goldbergs in 2013.
The way it is utilized in modern television production is particularly telling about what the legend now represents.
How shows use it to set a tone.
For the 2022 Amazon Prime series Paper Girls, which is about time-traveling teenagers from 1988, the publication CBR reported that featuring the mythical Polybius arcade cabinet in a scene was a highly deliberate creative choice by the showrunners.
It wasn't just set dressing.
It gave the series immediate, authentic 1980s science fiction credentials.
Yeah.
More importantly, it specifically helped differentiate the show's darker, more conspiratorial tone from other mainstream 80s nostalgia properties like Stranger Things.
Featuring Polybius signaled to the audience that they were dealing with a deeper, more paranoid cut of 80s lore.
And its cameo in Episode 5 of Marvel's Loki in 2021 was widely acclaimed by viewers.
That was a huge moment for the myth.
In a landscape littered with discarded timelines, the presence of the Polybius cabinet sparked massive social media speculation, with fans theorizing that the real-world conspiracy of the game was somehow integral to the show's fictional, multiversal narrative about the control of free will.
The legend also deeply permeated music and performance art, moving beyond just visual Easter eggs.
It inspired musicians and artists.
It was featured prominently as the main attraction in Nine Inch Nails' 2017 music video for the song Less Than, visually connecting the themes of digital consumption with mind control.
Trent Reznor using the cabinet is perfect imagery.
It was the subject of a series of retro computing performance art pieces in 2010 by artists Godot80 and Raquel Myers, who used early hardware to explore the myth.
And it moved into audio storytelling as well.
The narrative was even adapted into a highly produced 7-part audio program in 2017 called The Polybius Conspiracy, which itself was adapted from a previously canceled feature film project that had tried to adapt the legend for the big screen.
This raises an important question regarding the interactive media that was actually created in the wake of the legend.
People actually made the game.
The myth was so compelling that it inspired real software developers to attempt to bring the nightmare into reality. In 2007, a group of freeware developers known as Rogue Synapse released a fully playable PC game based entirely on the specific hallucinogenic descriptions posted on those early web forums.
The code of the myth.
The owner of Rogue Synapse, Dr. Estill Vance, leaned so far into the theatrical bit that he actually filed the paperwork and founded a real, legally recognized corporation in the state of Texas named Sinneslöschen.
He legally registered the fake company.
They presented their creation at arcade expos as a genuine attempt to recreate the game exactly as it might have existed in 1981, blurring the line between fan creation and historical recreation.
And the interactive fascination continued, appropriately, into the virtual reality space, the modern equivalent of 1980s immersive tech.
Virtual reality is the perfect medium for this.
In 2016 and 2017, the legendary game developer Jeff Minter, operating under his company Lamasoft, released a PlayStation 4 VR game officially bearing the legendary name Polybius.
Jeff Minter is an arcade development legend.
Minter, known for his eccentric marketing, initially tried to add to the hoax by giving interviews claiming he had actually played the original physical machine in a warehouse in Basingstoke, England, decades ago.
Adding fuel to the fire.
He later admitted this was just a playful promotional contribution to the ongoing myth. His actual VR game did not attempt to recreate the terrifying neurological symptoms described in the legend, but instead played much more like his critically acclaimed previous work on Tempest 2000, bringing the inspiration full circle.
If we connect all of this to the bigger picture, we have to look at the historical meaning and the lasting sociological impact of this digital phenomenon.
What does it represent today?
The documents provide some excellent historical context from cultural commentators. Ben Silverman of Yahoo! Games summarized the enduring appeal perfectly, noting that while there is absolutely zero evidence the game ever existed or that it turned users into babbling lunatics, it enjoys a massive cult-like status because it serves as a throwback to a more technologically paranoid era.
It represents a time before we understood the machines we were interacting with.
Exactly.
The reputation of the legend is completely solidified in the modern consciousness.
Yeah.
Ripley's, believe it or not, officially dubbed it the most dangerous video game to never exist, recognizing its power purely as a story.
It is a modern fairy tale.
And Portland historian Joe Streckert provided perhaps the most poignant and accurate comparison found in the documents. He stated, "What H.P. Lovecraft's Necronomicon is for books, Polybius is for video games."
That is a phenomenal comparison.
It is a foundational, completely fictional text that has irrevocably shaped the reality, the aesthetics, and the narrative possibilities of the medium it haunts.
Synthesizing this entire 45-year journey, what do we actually have? We have a factual, highly localized incident in 1981.
Which was completely mundane.
A mundane, financially motivated arcade bust involving illegally modified gambling machines, an FBI investigation recording high scores to find witnesses, and a couple of teenagers who genuinely felt physically sick from the intense flashing lights of early vector and raster screens.
Real events.
Those disparate, verifiable, real-world facts were left to simmer in the cultural memory for nearly 2 decades. Then, on a web forum in 1998, they were digitally alchemized into a modern mythology by someone who understood exactly how to manipulate the emerging internet.
A completely fabricated story that capitalized perfectly on genuine 1980s anxieties about government overreach, corporate secrecy, and the unknown physical and mental impacts of a rapidly advancing, highly engaging new technology.
It mapped directly onto our cultural fears.
So what does this all mean? The legend of Polybius tapped directly into those early 1980s fears about the unknown psychological effects of glowing screens and addictive feedback loops. It asked what happens when the machine controls the user. As we look at the highly addictive, meticulously algorithm-driven technologies we willingly carry in our pockets and stare at every single day, we have to ask ourselves a challenging question. Did the mind-controlling machine of our nightmares never exist, or did we just stop worrying about it once it became real? Thanks for listening.